You know the saying time flies? It's a true statement. It's pretty wild to think that us 2000s kids are at the point where some of our most iconic memories were now over 10 years ago. But this? Nickelodeon! Felt like yesterday. 10 years ago, my 12-year-old mind was conditioned into thinking the state of how life was going for me at the time, in terms of school, social status, and family, was going to go on forever. But the one mistake I made during my childhood was letting myself believe that the world around me had next to no great aspects to offer in terms of fun. Which, now that I think back, couldn't be further from the truth. And when I talk about the past, I don't just necessarily mean personal memories. I'm also talking about the things that were available to us in the world back then, because when you really think about it, the world was pretty much 100% different 10 plus years ago. Popular bands, fashion trends, the existences of arcades, online games that took the nation by storm, toys being the things that kids play with instead of phones! And I can go all day of the nostalgic things of the past that aren't really around today. But my point is, I finally realized how lucky I was to be born in the 2000s because I was able to live and experience all the great things that that decade had to offer. And any 2000s kid couldn't go wrong with the cartoons. Now, most kids from the 2000s were probably like me, a dude who ran home after school, chucked the idiotic concept of homework before electronics out the window, and turned on that TV to catch the newest episode of whatever was on Cartoon Network, Disney Channel, or Nickelodeon. It probably doesn't mean much nowadays considering the fact that online streaming services pretty much became the norm of watching stuff, but there's always something special about catching these shows on TV right after school because it gave you something to look forward to regardless of who you were. I was lucky enough to have a game console to keep me entertained for a while, but besides that, I had nothing else to really keep me occupied outside of school, nor did I have too many people to socialize with. And a lot of kids didn't even have that, and combining it with the possibility that going to school every day is something that you're never really gonna look forward to due to the typical struggles of being an everyday school nerd, cartoons gave you that distraction that you needed. The chance to get lost in a completely different world of creativity, life lessons, and overall experiences that'll give you something to talk about, to think about, and to even be inspired by. And that is what I believe helped a lot of kids continue through life as they grew up. Back in the day, a lot of cartoons that were on at a specific time were shown through afternoon television blocks. Pretty much a lineup of shows that specific channel bragged constantly in your face about must-watch shows that the cool guys watch. Stuff like the Disney Afternoon and Toonami, the latter one I remember watching the most, and they would most likely last like 2 to 3 hours on a weekday. Yet around this time, Cartoon Network replaced Toonami's time slot with Maguzi, a programming block that aired a lot of foreign shows from Europe. This caught a lot of viewers off guard as it sort of happened out of the blue, especially when people were already accustomed to watching our favorite anime. Maguzi was one of those programs that seemed a lot more interested in bringing in more kid-friendly programs to the platform rather than the edge Toonami had, which I can't imagine felt lame to a lot of teens at the time. And it's no more apparent than the theme of the block being a little girl stuck underwater inside a ship with cringe-looking CGI aliens. Nice art choice. But when it came to the actual shows that were on the block, Maguzi kicked tons of ass. From shows like Xylan Showdowns to Totally Spies and Robot Boy, Cartoon Network was only soaring through the skies. But the show that defined Maguzi, and honestly that entire channel for me, was definitely Code Lyoko. To me, the show had everything from memorable characters to an engaging narrative, an ambitious hybrid of 2D and 3D animation, really cool fight scenes, a lively fictional setting, fantastic music, and most importantly, a satisfying conclusion. But for those of you who are cursed enough into being in the dark, one might ask, what the hell is a Code Lyoko? Well, allow me. Created by Thomas Romain and Tania Palumbo, Code Lyoko is about a group of boarding school students who dedicate their days to fighting against an evil artificial intelligence known as Xanadu by transferring themselves to a virtual universe and in the process, assisting a humanoid girl by the name of Aelita. This show was one of the main things that Cartoon Network was pushing from their Maguzi block. Code Lyoko was massively successful as it consistently outperformed several other shows during its daytime showings on both Cartoon Network and years later on the VOD channel Kabillion. The accolades go decent decently far for the show, and I'm happy for it. But to me, numbers hold no weight when it comes to the quality of any product, which makes it all the more enticing to explain to you how Code Lyoko effectively and efficiently earned the success that it had. Alright, in terms of characters, one of the things I've always admired in my cartoons, especially from back in my youth, was seeing a character that I could relate to on a personal level, or seeing someone whom I could root for because of their tireless work ethic, seeing someone gradually develop from being a nothing to a strong and independent fighter, having someone to look up to make you smile and laugh even in the darkest of times, or seeing a mature and caring individual constantly going as far as putting their neck on the line in order to ensure the safety of their friends. And in Code Lyoko, I believe there's someone here for almost everyone. Even with a few side characters some might consider annoying, they're still memorable because how effectively they contributed to the world building. And the best part is that they all for the most part develop, because over the course of the show there's plenty of instances where the group gets into a series of drama, whether it be from one another or each of them individually with an outside source. While some of them can get ridiculous even to the point of it being flat out absurd, I always found that these moments did a good job at representing the mental and emotional flaws within all these characters and all the social issues that a lot of kids will deal with at that age, being early teens and such. Yeah, it can be annoying frequently seeing two friends on and off with their feelings toward each other, but at the same time, that's realistic given their age. Difficult relationships like that are common in the real world, especially in the age of teens, because they're still developing and discovering new emotions they can't fully understand. Not everyone can be a Cory Topanga where they can both hit it off as soon as they are in middle school. But that's the beauty of a group's inner flaws, because those flaws can create a strong bond. Bonds that can be strengthened each time they come together and remember why they were friends in the first place, despite their disagreements. And that's what made it all the more satisfying seeing these characters grow throughout the show. I obviously didn't look at any of this that deep when I first watched Code Lyoko as a kid, but I still knew that the friendship that these guys had was not only real, but something I dreamed of having. Now watching this as an adult, I can now fully appreciate the direction that the writers wanted to go with the relationships of all these characters. Even if, again, some of the drama can be extremely absurd and flat out stupid. But all in all, I found all the main characters to be extremely memorable and special, with Odd being my favorite character out of them all.
Virtualization.
Back in my day, almost any cartoon that had action was up my alley, so when it came to the Lyoko scenes, I was always hyped. Video gaming was my #1 hobby ever since I was a child, and that combined with the concept of virtual reality, which was new to me at the time, was just so cool to me as a kid. Even the virtualization transitional scenes from the scanners were so damn cool to me, especially with the sound design of the virtualization process climax at the end was always great to hear. And the actual Lyoko fights were extremely entertaining to me at the time too. Watching the show again, after all these years, the flaws of the Lyoko scenes, mostly from season 1 I'll say, became extremely noticeable to me. And that's not just from a graphical standpoint, being that it is low budget 3D animation, but there's quite a bit of repetition with the fights. Certain characters just stand around too much, and characters getting de-virtualized in the most boneheaded ways possible.
Follow me, Odd.
Which is why I'm so glad that there was a dramatic improvement with everything I said before by the time season 2 kicks off, and the Lyoko battles were extremely exciting to watch. For one, the fight choreography, especially in season 4, is on point. One of the things I love is that some of these individual fights tend to choreograph in a way that showcases the personalities of the characters, which I got a kick out of, because they really threw in some great lines of dialogue exchange in these moments, which made those scenes memorable and fun to rewatch. Especially when they do stuff like this.
I was just about to get a hold of the data.
Another thing worth mentioning is how some of the episodes tend to throw in something unique to keep the formulaic nature of the show from getting stale. An example being the episode that showcases the enemy of my enemy is my friend concept. Another episode has the characters trapped in a replica of their reality created by Xanadu. Some episodes have the characters fighting underwater using submarines, and some episodes have the characters being virtualized to different regions of the real world, completely adding multiple layers of the Lyoko scenes that kept them investing for me to watch as a child and rewatch as an adult. I just think they executed the concept of blending 2D animation with 3D animation so well to create a show that felt like a breath of fresh air. Going back to what I said before though about things improving after season 2, that goes especially for the story. Code Lyoko season 1 was a season that most people could tell had the least amount of quality due to the slow and repetitive plot progression within each episode. It didn't bother me as a kid watching this. In fact, season 1 is the season I keep coming back to the most, which I'll explain later, but I do understand that the first season can deter a lot of potential fans because it really felt like only kids can get the most out of it. However, the show completely transforms once season 2 starts because it begins immediately with an engaging narrative that not only kids can get sucked into, but adults can fully enjoy as well from then to the finale of the series. From learning about Aelita's past to the introduction of William, the mystery of Franz Hopper, among other things, added so much depth to the story to the point where the entire scope of the show transcended from a simple action cartoon for kids to a shonen series for pretty much everyone. And I was beyond hooked. As a kid, I was already watching shows like Ben 10 and Teen Titans, shows that had great respective narratives of their own, but Code Lyoko, well, not without its plot holes here and there, had a different feel towards its narrative that felt unique and creative in its own right. Season 4 being a huge example of that as the stakes grew higher with each episode, the more powerful Xana got. But the best thing I could say about this story is that the characters, for the most part, grew significantly on me as the series went on. Whenever the emotional beats kicked in within the episodes, I felt something, especially with the mature conversations that the characters would have with each other, with one of them easily being one of the top moments of this entire show period for me. Here's the scene.
Hi, I came to see how you were.
Yeah, right. When you have a good chance to humiliate the competition, you might as well go for it.
I missed something here? What's your problem?
You're my problem.
No, that'd be too easy, Ulrich. Let me tell you what's wrong around here. My being around Yumi forces you to ask yourself a question, a tough question that you can't answer. Here's a piece of friendly advice. Go and talk to Yumi from the heart, or else one day I will, and then I really will be your problem.
That was one of the realest and most effective one-on-one conversations I've ever heard on TV, with William willingly letting Ulrich ask out the girl that they both like to put the drama that they both have with each other to rest, and if he doesn't, one day, he will, and then Ulrich will finally have a reason to hate him. I didn't watch Avatar: The Last Airbender until around 2010, so Code Lyoko was really the first cartoon that made me connect with the characters in ways I couldn't even imagine when I was young at the time, and I couldn't appreciate that more. And that brings us to the main villain of this series, Xana. To recap, Xana is an evil artificial intelligence that sends various attacks directly to Earth by activating towers on Lyoko for the goal of taking over the world. To simply put, Xana is awesome as a villain. From beginning to end, Xana has been consistently intimidating and quite scary as a villain, and that's not an exaggeration when I say scary. One of the things I love about Xana is that whenever he makes a move on Earth, there's always a sense of genuine fear from his presence that I never really got from any other show at the time. Part of that is due to the fantastic theme that plays every time he shows up, in which I'll discuss more along when I get to the soundtrack later, but Xana never really felt like a wishy-washy cartoon villain to me because every time he did something, from summoning his ghost to interact with various objects to causing environmental hazards, felt extremely threatening. Plus, Xana is brutal with some of the attacks that he does. He takes over a school bus full of kids and tries to crash into a chemical plant. He traps one of the characters down a drain under a steel grate and leaves on a water string to drown him in the process. He takes over a flock of crows and one of the characters almost got pecked to death. He sends an army of rats around the entire school. Rats! That last attack being my favorite Xana attack in the entire show, by the way, because it borders on being a horror film with the depiction of rats in some of these scenes. Like, it's actually crazy. These are kids that are of the age range of 13 to 14 years old, and the fact that none of these kids are traumatized or suffer from severe cases of PTSD from the things that Xana does is actually quite amazing. I especially remembered feeling so uncomfortable watching the rat scenes as a kid, and even now as an adult, because it goes to show how that it was easily just the tip of the iceberg of how dark this show really was at its core, and I love it for that. The show never really felt afraid of slightly going past its target age demographic to nail in the themes that it's trying to present to you, and that's a move that so many cartoons from modern day can't really get away with as much as they used to. The reason why I keep coming back to season 1 the most to rewatch episodes is because this season has my favorite Xana attacks in the entire series. And another thing I appreciate about Xana is how the writers managed to keep his presence of being threatening without ever really having to show a visualized form of Xana. You never really get to see his true face, and I like that. In fact, the closest we ever got into seeing something like that was with one of the later episodes of season 1, and as soon as that appeared on screen, I was on the edge of my seat with everything that happened afterward in that scene, both as a kid and now, especially with the music. And speaking of music, the show easily has one of the most memorable soundtracks I've ever heard in any cartoon ever. It kills me that this show doesn't have an official OST with all the themes that I can buy. For me, a soundtrack should not only provide fun and catchy music to the ears, but also help carry the core experience of the story throughout the show, and Code Lyoko excels in that amazingly well. I can't tell you how many times I used to have the theme that played whenever the characters were on their way to the factory playing in my head back then. And the Virtualization theme always pumped me up whenever I heard it. The theme that plays whenever Xana is currently attacking Earth is excellent. It's so dark and monstrous, so dramatic, and it does a great job at evoking genuine fear and danger to the audience at every occasion the characters are fending off against Xana's attacks. And I always used to get excited whenever William showed up on screen because the theme that plays whenever he gets to fight is badass. Obviously, I was saving the best for last, and that's the opening theme for the show A World Without Danger.
Here we are, going far to save all that we love. If we give all we've got, we will make it through. Here we are, like a star, shining bright on your world today. Make evil go away. Cold your cold will, we set it all. Cold your cold, be there when you call. Cold your cold, we will stand real tall. Cold your cold, stronger after all.
There's always that one song from a show that you instantly recognize, that immediately brings back the memories and the emotions you felt in the past watching it, and as soon as you hear it as it comes up on TV, you're immediately ignited to drop everything to let yourself be consumed by the experience that follows. And the opening theme of Code Lyoko is exactly that for me. This song was my national anthem growing up. I have loved this song ever since I first heard it. It's my favorite opening song to any cartoon ever, bar none. Nothing even comes close. It's such a great and catchy song that perfectly captures the tone that the show is going for, and I listen to it frequently. It's so 2000s and I love it for that. I also want to take the time to talk about how this show looks, because I'm the type of guy that loves to appreciate art, especially nowadays because I find that a lot of modern day cartoonists are having a hard time creating an art form that stands out among the rest. As for Code Lyoko, the art style for the show is great. Yes, I even love the foreheads, as I think it adds a lot of charm to the established style. I love the colors that's used in the backgrounds. I like the outfits on all the characters, both in the real world and in Lyoko, as they represent the personalities of the characters really well. Now, ever since I first laid my eyes on Catnic Academy, I wished that place was real so I could live there. And it kinda is, by the way, because the school was designed by a real life location in France. But I suddenly had the craving of going to boarding school because the entire grand scope of Katek Academy was just so interesting and inviting for me. And the same goes for the factory, because as a kid I always wanted a secret hideout where me and a couple of my friends could hang out, and the factory was just perfect in my eyes. It just looks so cool from an aesthetic standpoint. That's actually an aspect about the show I wish we saw more of actually, as I wanted to see more of the inside locations and places inside the factory, because whenever the characters are being chased around the factory by Xanadus attacks, for example, to this day, I'm always visually stimulated by all the areas that they visit inside the factory because of how distinct and well detailed they are, which made them so cool to me. All of this stuff was so cool to the point where I remembered having multiple dreams in the past of me being in this show because of how cool I thought the settings and the backgrounds of the show was. This is something I can't praise the artist for the show enough for, is making a visually captivating fantasy world for a kid like me at the time to constantly think about and daydream about myself being there. And that's all I did whenever I was sitting through what I felt like was a boring lecture at middle school. That's how memorable those locations were to me. The show was successful during its run on Cartoon Network, but growing up around that time, I didn't know too many people who watched it necessarily. All I was hearing about when it came to shows on Cartoon Network at the time were the mainstream ones. It wasn't until several years later on the internet that I discovered so many comments on videos, entire fan sites, and so many people expressing these exact same nostalgic feelings about the show, which blew my mind at the time because I never knew that show resonated with so many people, less remembered it. The show had its success, but it's not Codename Kids Next Door popular, if you catch my drift, where you would naturally expect millions of people to remember it years later after it finished. I legitimately thought I'd be one of the few guys around the web who'd still remember it, but it miraculously became a cult status. It blows my mind to see so many people still talking about it even after all these years. The Code Lyoko fanbase is so alive in present day where it's as if the show never left, which is beyond beautiful because the show deserves it. I also want to mention this real quick. There's so many people saying that they wish the show would come back out of nostalgia, and while I can understand that sentiment considering the fact that I used to be of that same mindset like a while ago, it's important that we need to realize how lucky we were that Code Lyoko had an ending to begin with. While not without a few unanswered questions, the show was able to have a satisfying conclusion, which can't be said for a lot of shows running back then and even now. Even while I do miss it, I'm not sad that it's gone. I'm happy that Code Lyoko happened. Just like the 2000s, an era where social media and online chats weren't really a thing, and how we would socialize and deal with typical life problems completely different. A time where shows that were targeted towards kids were allowed to push boundaries in order to deliver a much more memorable experience, as well as having a stronger impact on its audience. I'm happy that I got to be a part of a decade that not only gave me so many cool things that were exclusive to it, but granted me the honor of growing up with the coolest cast of characters that I looked up to, that I laughed with, that I connected with and respected most of all, as they willingly took on a big job that made them sacrifice so much of their lives in order to achieve their goal because they knew, as long as they had each other, it was worth it. This very aspect of the show defines who I am, and that is how Code Lyoko was the embodiment of my childhood.